Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the Daily Friend Show. Your host, Nicholas Lorimer, and today I'm joined by Mr. Marius Roodt. Marius, how are you doing this, in Joburg at least, very rainy, soggy day?
Yeah, not too bad. It's nice sometimes to have this kind of weather. I think the country probably needs it. Can't believe we're starting off talking about the weather on the Daily Friend, but hey.
That's how it is. You've got to ease people into it. You can't just hit them with, ESCOM is burning down, the country's in chaos.
Exactly.
You have to play it soft. And of course, we also have Mr. Gabriel Crouse. Gabriel, how are you?
Dude, I'm very good. Yesterday in the rain, I was slapped in the face by a jacaranda blossom. And I'm holding on to that story because it encapsulates the kind of strange, kind of good, kind of weird universe that I feel like we've entered in Coalition Week.
Indeed, and that will be our first topic. I just want to also apologize ahead of time. If lots of noise starts happening, it's because the rain has gotten very heavy. So far, it's okay, but I just apologize if you hear that noise. And also, please like our video if you're watching on YouTube, subscribe to our channel, leave us a review if you're listening to us on audio. If you enjoy the show, it really helps us and the algorithm to spread our great tentacles across the media space in South Africa. If you give us likes, engagements, comments, all that stuff. So appease the master of us all, which is the YouTube comment algorithm, which has a mind of its own, and like us. Anyway, enough waffling. Coalitions. So we talked about them, of course, last week in the wake of the local government election. And I think last week we just sort of said, there's going to be a lot of them, and there's a lot of opportunity for various parties to make moves, particularly the various opposition parties. And moves are indeed being made. So I think let's start with ActionSA and the DA. So the DA over the weekend held a press conference. Well, not quite a press conference. They broadcast a video directly to the public. They said, look, don't believe anything you read in the Sunday newspapers. It's all garbage. Here's what we want. Here's what we're going to do. It is not going to coalition with the EFF, not going to coalition with the ANC. We're currently talking to the ACDP, the Freedom Front Plus, ActionSA, the IFP, all these other little parties. And we're going to draw up what we call a coalition agreement, which says that we have to have these particular things, including no quotas, which I think was quite good. And if we don't get that coalition agreement, then we're very happy to go into opposition, because if we don't make stable, functional governments, that won't work very well. So that was, I think, quite positive. I'd like to get your guys' thoughts on that. ActionSA, for their part, we haven't heard as much. They said they were talking to other parties. But this morning, Herman Mashaba went on 702, I think it was, and he said some rather strange things. He said that he would only go into coalition with the DA if it treats poor black people better. He said that the DA was currently in coalition talks with the ANC, and that these were being facilitated by us, the IRR, which was a bit weird. So it's also looking increasingly like there is going to be no opposition coalition in Johannesburg, because it would include an enormous number of parties who aren't willing to work together. Let me start with you, Gabriel. What do you make of what the DA said? What do you make of what Mashaba said? What do you make of this whole sort of first round of coalition stuff?
Yeah, so I think the DA seems to be moving with alacrity, and that is kind of impressive. So 2017, Ramaphosa beats Dlamini Zuma, and the DA has good things to say about that. 2018, Ramaphosa is elected. The DA has some good things to say about that. Then even after Musi Maimane is replaced, the DA still has some good things to say about, quote unquote, the good ANC. And I don't know. I mean, having personally followed a similar trajectory where I initially was really enthused by Ramaphosa's victory, I could understand why it became appealing to think that, especially if there had been an ANC split after Nasrec, that the good ANC and the DA might work together, form a majority through that coalition at national level and similarly at local level, and go forward on that basis. Keep the EFF out of play, who at the time were the fastest growing party. Things changed. The ANC's incapacity for reform was, I think, painfully demonstrated, even in the face of the most, sympathetic interpretation of honest onlookers. It just became clear that the ANC would maybe throw one or two scapegoats at the mob to kind of appease them, but that the kinds of structural reforms that needed to take place and the kinds of wide-scale prosecutions, literally thousands of people need to be prosecuted, that's not taking place. So the good ANC fizzled away as an idea. And so the DA enters this new space where they're like, okay, this time we're just definitely not working with the ANC, and we're definitely not working with the EFF. That's the most important thing. I mean, they're both the most important thing. The DA and the EFF working together in Joburg was a nightmare. And Nelson Mandela Bay and so on. A good mistake to not repeat. I think what makes Mashaba's comments... look, Mashaba has problems with the IRR. He's accused one of our colleagues, Herman Pretorius, of being like a dyed-in-the-wool racist, which is completely not true. And Mashaba had no basis for saying that, excepting he just felt like saying something. And yet the IRR continues to be, staffed by a lot of people that are keen to see the better angels of Mashaba's nature shine through. He occupies a very interesting position in South African politics right now. And he could be a real force for good. And there's some elements of his biography that speak to that hope. There's also some serious problems. Anyway, the point is that the IRR, through an editorial on the Daily Friend last week, said the following: IRR warns opposition parties against going into coalition with ANC and EFF. Okay? That was like a public IRR statement. Now, the IRR does not do one thing in public and another thing in private. So usually I wouldn't want to reject this claim. I'd rather say no comment, because if you are in the business of facilitating secret meetings between political parties to try and bring about growth in South Africa, you don't really want to be saying that you're doing it necessarily. And if you say every time you don't do it, then if you're accused of doing it or it's alleged that you do it, and then you say no comment, then it sounds like that's just another way of saying yes. So generally, this is not something that I'd want to talk about in public. But because we said on Wednesday, publicly, we warn opposition parties against going into coalition with the EFF and the ANC. We see the ANC and the EFF as an old water buffalo and a young calf grazing on the lived experience, grazing on the lives of ordinary South Africans, trampling them under hoof, chowing up their grass, putting it in the back pocket. And the opposition parties might have fantasized each about being a grand lion that would come and bring down the buffalo alone. That's not happening. It's a pack of wild dogs. They need to kind of work together. They can snap at each other's heels, but really they need to work together to take this thing down. That's been our line. We don't say that and do a completely different thing in public. So that's just silly from Mashaba. But let me add, he said that the DA is working with the ANC, and you can tell because they've voted all of its budgets throughout in Johannesburg since he left. Now, that's just not true. It's public. That's not even a lie, because it's so obviously not true. That's just what the Princeton philosopher Harry Frankfurt calls bull S. I won't say the whole thing in case we get slaughtered by
bull
the
sugar.
algorithm. Bull sugar. Okay, man's talking bull sugar. The DA voted against the ANC's adjusted budget in January, February, and it voted against the annual budget in the winter. The ANC only managed to pass it with the, rats and mice parties. So I think Mashaba is trying to politic. I think he doesn't know where he stands. And so he kind of is hoping that his followers will fall for anything. And in itself, not a big deal to say that the IRR is kind of ruling the country. I mean, that would be nice.
It'd be kind of cool, right?
So it's not the worst thing to say.
Our instructions are going up to Latuli House from the Daily Friend show.
Exactly.
Yeah, guys, you don't realize, of the people that are watching this right now, Cyril Ramaphosa's PA is literally watching this and taking notes.
Exactly.
Okay.
With lots of coded words for them to tell them what to do and stuff. Jesse Dwight, that's sort of cool.
But I just, so the worry is that if you start talking bull sugar this early, where does it lead? It's a bit shameless.
Yeah, it's not really helping the whole project of going after the ANC, particularly because, and I want to get your thoughts on this, Marius. Herman Mashaba has also said that DA needs to really think about going into coalition with the EFF if it wants to get Joburg back, and presumably that would include ActionSA as well. And one of the reasons why this is difficult is because the EFF has just laid down its conditions for going into coalitions, and it says that any party that wants to go into coalition with the EFF at local government level must commit to amending the constitution to expropriate land without compensation within 6 months, create a state bank, nationalize a reserve bank, cancel student debt, create a state pharmaceutical company, pass an insourcing bill, remove DSTEM from the national anthem, open clinics for 24 hours, provide free sanitary pads to all, and provide free water and electricity to all beneficiaries of SASA. Right. What do you make of all that?
It's all pie in the sky stuff. I mean, maybe the one thing I'd say maybe is not a bad idea is having clinics open for 24 hours. But obviously, you've got to pay people who staff it. Also, what I quite liked in that statement is they say SASA beneficiaries, but they actually get it wrong. They say SA beneficiaries, and SASA is actually SA. So they couldn't even get the acronym right. So it's all just, kind of the pie in the sky stuff. I don't know if it's actually even the EFF making these ridiculous demands so that they won't be in coalition and they won't have to do the hard work of actually governing. Because we've seen what happens when you are in government in these big cities like Tshwane and Joburg and so on. You get punished by the voters at the next election. That's what happened to the ANC and the DA. As it stands now, the DA can get a fairly stable coalition in Tshwane with ActionSA, Freedom Front Plus, ACDP, and COPE. That gives them 1-seat majority. And they can get a coalition in Joburg without the EFF. But then you got DA, ActionSA, Patriotic Alliance, IFP, Freedom Front Plus, and the ACDP. That gives you about 137 seats or so. There's 270 seats in Joburg.
The IFP and the Patriotic Alliance in particular, I think, are difficult to go into coalition with because they have a habit of switching sides. I think the PA has basically voted for and against pretty much every coalition government in the country.
As I think it stands now, it was before this election, obviously. The PA was in the governing coalition in Nelson Mandela Bay with the DA. But I think they've sided with the ANC in other places. And I think you were saying, Nick, that the IFP said that they won't go into coalition with the ANC in KwaZulu-Natal. But that obviously leaves Joburg. And the IFP in Joburg is a bit of a different beast from the IFP in KZN. So, yeah, let's see what happens. But I think it'll be quite disappointing if Herman Mashaba does go half-cocked with these kind of conspiracies that the IR is, facilitating these kind of talks and saying weird things, because he's obviously, there's something, he's tapped into something. If you drill down, I think I've mentioned this before here, if you drill down into how ActionSA did, it did actually very well in places like Soweto. It was getting 20 or 30% of the votes in wards there. So it means that there is definitely an appetite for a party to oppose the ANC, but like kind of free market, broadly speaking, party. I think the EFF, a lot of people are turned off by, even disillusioned ANC voters are turned off by the EFF's rhetoric and these very radical economic policies they propose.
And it's also, I think it's encouragement of disorder and violence, I think, turns a lot of South Africans off.
So there's definitely ActionSA, there's definitely a market for this kind of non-racial, I mean, I'm taking face value, what ActionSA says, free market, and doesn't have the kind of racial baggage that the DA has. There's definitely something there. So it'll be quite a disappointment if Mashaba does go down these weird paths and, and if it just remains a vehicle for Mashaba's personal ambitions rather than something that can actually threaten the ANC.
So let's address the question now of coalitions with the ANC. So the DA said it won't do this. Mashaba says they're in evil secret negotiations to do so. And Adrian Basson has said the DA needs to go into coalition with the ANC to prop it up, to protect Cyril Ramaphosa's reform agenda. He goes on to say that all of these things that the EFF says that it wants to do within 12 months as a condition for going into coalitions will come true if the DA doesn't save the ANC from the EFF. What do you make of the argument by the editor of News 24?
Yeah, so let's just bear in mind, this is the editor of the biggest, news publication in the country. It's so wild. It's really wild. So, but maybe I'll disagree a little bit with Marius's characterization of the EFF wish list as being pie in the sky. The EFF's wish list is basically Ramaphosa's agenda. So, starting with expropriation without compensation, this is Ramaphosa's signature policy. This is what the EFF wants. Adrian Basson says no, they're in a terrible disagreement about whether the state should take custodianship over land. He can't even bring himself to say what the disagreement's about. The disagreement's about whether they should take custodianship over all land. The ANC wants custodianship over land in the state's hands. Ramaphosa wants that. This is the official ANC policy. This is what they've tabled before Parliament. The EFF says, no, you guys must say all land. And then the ANC said, no, we'll say certain land. And then they said, no, that's not good enough. You have to say all land. Basson, the chief editor of the biggest news publication in this country, can't bother to mention that detail and instead creates the misapprehension that the EFF wants custodianship and the ANC doesn't. I don't want to call him a liar. I want to call him like sloppier than like an Omo rusk that's been hanging out in a hot cup of tea for like weeks on end. It's so sloppy. Okay. Then a state bank. Ramaphosa was confronted about nationalizing the Reserve Bank, and he said, not yet. He didn't say he's against nationalizing the Reserve Bank, and his party has made several active moves that he supported to create a state bank or to take the land bank and grow it. So again, this is just ANC stuff. Free sanitary pads, like I haven't been through a Women's Month where the ANC hasn't called for free sanitary pads. That is a classic ANC call. I can't remember the others, but I've been through like 4. And if you go through all of them, they're all basically Ramaphosa reform agendas. The difference between Ramaphosa and Malema is that Ramaphosa, wants to go about it slightly more slowly, and Malema wants to go about it slightly more quickly. I think what Basson... So the point is, Basson's premises are sloppy, basically fake facts. And the conclusion that it leads him to is that it's the DA's fault if the ANC and the EFF go into coalition and then ruin a city. That is, I'm sorry to say, there are some South Africans that have this problem with individual agency, with treating individuals as responsible agents who, if you make a mess, it's your fault. If you do something good, it's kudos to you. And some people have a big problem with that when it comes to Black South Africans. Some people struggle very hard to treat Black South Africans as individuals, just like everyone else. And if you're at the point where you're saying the EFF and the ANC mess up in Joburg, that's the DA's fault, and you're the guy who characterizes the DA as a white supremacist party, then I think you have fallen into the trap of the worst kind of white burden supremacy, where you're treating people like children who are not children. You're treating people as irresponsible who are responsible for their own decisions. The EFF and the ANC make their own decisions. They've got their own policies. They're basically the same policies. It makes perfect sense ideologically for them to work together. The only point where I agree with Basson is it doesn't make me super excited about being a Johannesburger, because the prospects of things actually getting better, not that great. But here's the test. Here's the proof of the pudding. Why doesn't Basson blame ActionSA for not getting into a coalition with the EFF and the ANC to go and help them out, right? Or if he wants the EFF out, ActionSA and the ANC get together, they've got the numbers, basically. Why doesn't he say it's the ActionSA's fault for staying away? That's going to put the EFF and the ANC in bed together. No, it's not serious, and it's not respectful.
Do you agree, Marius, with Gabriel's take there? What do you make of this idea of the DA going to coalition with the ANC in municipalities around the country?
Yeah, I agree with Gabriel. I think John Steenhuisen made a good point. He said it's not the DA's job to save the ANC, the DA's job to save South Africa. And I think he's right there. And I mean, I think the EFF would also maybe, if they go into coalition with the ANC in various cities, it's a way to get their agenda, which Gabriel does have a very good point that a lot of the stuff they do want is what the ANC wants too. I think maybe just a slow version, or not as quite as radical. But the ANC is, it's basically the Titanic. It's sinking, and it's inevitable. The ANC, I think, by the end of the decade, the ANC won't exist or won't really exist in a recognizable form. It's hemorrhaging votes all the time. People are pretty much hurtful with it. It's used up most of its liberation capital. Now I think, most, or not most, but a lot of people who vote for it because it's the ANC for no other reason. I mean, this also isn't a phenomenon you only get in South Africa. Lots of people around the world vote for certain parties because it is that party. In South Africa during apartheid, lots of people just voted for the Nats because they were the Nats and they were the party that liberated Afrikaners. So same kind of thing. But yeah, I think the ANC is a dying party. It'd probably be, still the biggest party, though. We can't forget that. And a point I made before the show that outside of Gauteng, KwaZulu-Natal, Eastern Cape, and the Western Cape, the ANC is still the single biggest party in every single municipality across the country. And in Limpopo and in rural Eastern Cape, it's still getting sometimes 80% of the vote. So it's the ANC. It's still obviously a major player, but I do think it's not the DA's job to save it. It's not ActionSA's job to save it. And I think people like the DA and ActionSA should try as much as possible to work together away from parties like the ANC and EFF, because they're not their policies and the way they do things is not going to be the way to make South Africa into a country that works for everybody. We've heard this tune before. It's happened in Zimbabwe. It's happened in Venezuela. And the things that the ANC and EFF want to do, South Africa's going to be Zimbabwe by the end of the century, I think, or end of the decade, rather.
Indeed. And our colleague, one of our colleagues, I can't remember which one now, said that the ANC would actually have a seat at getting negotiations going with the other opposition parties, with ActionSA, with the DA, with all of them, if there was a reform agenda, but there isn't. And so it's completely ridiculous.
Dude, I love, yeah. Just on that note, like Bassan's other point was, the EFF is a racist party, but the ANC is non-racial for the future. It's not non-racial now. It's waiting. It sees non-racialism in the future. And that's why, come on, if there was a reform agenda, the ANC would be so well positioned to say, guys, let's go non-racial now. It's been in the constitution. Let's pull the trigger. Let's scrap this race baiting nonsense. Let's free up markets, get rid of some of the worst regulations. Oh my word. And there would be a clamoring to work with the ANC.
Didn't John Steenhuisen's insane parliament a little while ago that the DA will work with Cyril Ramaphosa if he wants to implement an actual reformist agenda to actually free up the economy and so on. He said the DA, and I'm not one of these people who says
that was not actually John Steenhuisen who said it. It was the IRR. With our puppet mastery skills.
Exactly.
Oh yes, apparently.
Because there's nothing. I'm not completely opposed to the DA working with the ANC, but it's got to work with an ANC that wants to reform the country, not this current ANC. It's pointless propping up this ANC that gets its ideas from 1960s Soviet textbooks. It's got to be look at what actually works around the world, and not this. What would Joseph Stalin have done? And cool, let's do that.
You know that old line, don't feed the trolls?
Yes.
That's good advice.
Mm.
If there's a zombie attacking your village, you don't give it fresh meat to strengthen up.
And I've made this analogy before. The ANC is basically a zombie because I think it's almost kind of dead, but it's still busy feasting. It's not quite dead, but it's going to become like ZANU-PF, that's a dead party. But
that's a brain dead party for sure.
Yeah. And it's still feasting on what's left of Zimbabwe. And Zimbabwe, we don't have to rehash the story of Zimbabwe. Zimbabwe was one of the growing economy in Africa, and look at it now. Its economy is probably smaller than Ekurhuleni's now.
Indeed. Right. So I just want to get your thoughts on what we think the coalitions are going to be sort of going forward. What our kind of guesses is. One option that exists for a lot of parties, I think, and I suspect this will be the case in Joburg, is the opposition to the ANC-EFF bloc will let the ANC and EFF elect a mayor and set the agenda, but when really bad ideas come up, they'll block them in the city council, which is, of course, I think something else that Bassan doesn't really address, which is that, it's easier to get people to block things on a vote-by-vote basis. If there's a proposal in the city council to, I don't know, expropriate all private property or something, then it could be blocked by the opposition working together without having to form a government, which is quite an interesting idea. Makes
I think
life
that's
very difficult for government.
Yeah, so I think that'd be a really fresh way for South Africans to learn something about opposition politics. Look, this is the first time in the history of this country that the ANC nationwide has dropped below 50%. So there have been minority governments at local level before, but it's not part of the zeitgeist. It's not something that we understand very well. And Joburg, being the richest city in Africa, twice as rich as the next richest one, it's going to get the news. And if this ends up happening, for the first time, I think, in our history, you're going to see memes about city council elections coming out of Johannesburg. Some really bad idea being tabled, the opposition, including ActionSA and the DA, while shouting at each other and accusing the other one of being run by the IRR. Anyway, that opposition ensemble voting against the really terrible idea, I think that's going to educate people about democracy. I think that could boost voter turnout going into 2024 and into the next municipal election. I think that would be really healthy. I think where it becomes a bit scary is in passing budgets. There have been problems in 2020. Joburg didn't pass a budget, so the MEC had to step in and say, guys, here's a new deadline. If you don't pass the budget by then you're going into administration. Here's the problem with Joburg going into administration. The budget is 80 billion rand. And if you give that over to the provincial legislature, which is being run by cadre deluxe, like Premier League cadre deployment peeps, then you are, oh my word, exposing a lot more corruption. So it's going to be a hard thing to deal with. On the other hand, it would probably almost certainly force a snap election. And then Joburgers might get a chance to come back to the party and say, hold on, what is it that we're really looking for? And I think that'd be interesting too. But in the meanwhile, I think it's going to be good to pay attention to what's going on in the city council.
Also, just one point. Oh, sorry.
This is also an opportunity to really see, which opposition parties are doing well, which are doing badly, because you can see how they're playing with coalition politics. Sorry, you're saying, Marius?
Yeah, I was wondering also, R.W. Johnson wrote a very good column in Politics Web today, and he made the point that South Africans have never really, for the past 70 years, really, South Africa has not really been a multi-party democracy. Obviously, under apartheid, it wasn't a multi-party democracy, but even then, white politics was dominated by the National Party. Now, since 1994, South Africa, politics has been dominated by the ANC. And now this is the first time, as Gabriel says, ANC has fallen under 50%. And we are starting a new era, I think, in South African politics, where there's going to be real multi-party democracy, and with all the messiness that comes from that. And we better hope that our parties are mature enough to do it. I mean, I've made the point before about Germany's always going by coalitions, but the parties managed to work well together and put forward their proposals and so on. I mean, in the last German election, which was held at the end of September, the biggest party, the Social Democratic Party, only won 25% of the vote. And South Africa is getting to a point like that soon, where the biggest party is probably going to be a 20 or 25% party, single biggest party in the legislature. So things are going to get fruity in South African politics over the next couple of years, I think.
Dude, all of these meetings we're going to have to facilitate between all of the different parties.
We basically be an events company.
Yes, it's going to be wild.
I wish. Anyway, so we're pretty close to the end there. Is there any sort of last words you guys want before we close up?
Yeah, I'll just say, look, here's, part of the coalition politics to me that's interesting is this local level stuff, because administration at local level really does make a difference. The meat and potatoes issues of potholes and water reticulation, electricity power boxes, substations not being replaced, all of that kind of stuff matters. It matters a hell of a lot in Joburg, where I live, because a lot of our infrastructure is hitting its shelf life. It needs to be not just renovated and maintained, but actually rejuvenated and reinstalled. I don't know that we have the government to do that in the next 5 years, and that makes me bleak. But the bigger issue is national policies, the Employment Equity Act going to Parliament's opening business, the expropriation without compensation, national health insurance, basically nationalizing. These are major agendas. And I think that the signal the ANC EFF coalition will have gotten is that they had 2/3 in 2019. You add them together this time, they've come down to 55%. They no longer at that level would have a 2/3 majority. So if we ran a national election now, and it went the same way that this municipal election had just gone, that amending the constitution thing would go out of their hands. in a way, I think that's going to energize some of them to try and accelerate this agenda. And you're seeing that in the EFF demands. The question is going to be, how does the pushback work? And their ActionSA is going to be very important to look at, because while they have no seats in parliament, they have the ear of the public opinion makers. They're the darling of the new media. And if they make their voices heard in the right way, I think it could be very helpful. If they spend their time sort of denouncing white arrogance and flirting with the EFF, then I think that's going to be such a tragic missed opportunity.
Precisely. Anyway, that's all we have time for today. So thank you very much. And we will see you tomorrow on the Daily Friend Show.